My name's Glyn Pooley, and I'd like to talk about art. This time, my subject is...
This presentation, I'll be talking about tonalism. As the title suggests, it is focused on the tonal aspect of our paintings, but not just the tone. It's all about relationships tonight in the different aspects of our structures of our paintings. So when I say relationships, I mean relationships between shapes, tone, space, the kind of marks that are being used, and the kind of feeling that is being portrayed in an artwork. Now, any of us have had a go at making our paintings. As Liz said earlier, I do like to emphasize our tonal ranges and our tonal balances. And arrangement is the right word here. So we're looking at painting by James Mc Neill Whistler, an American artist that traveled around to European countries, particularly France, and settled in England. So there's a few pictures here we'll look at that he painted while he was in England. So you can see this painting is painted in 1871, which is the same time as the Impressionist movement was taken off in France. So their emphasis, of course, was capturing colour, light, fleeting effects, things like that. When this painting was released, Whistler received quite a bit of criticism from the establishment. They objected to the fact that he called it an arrangement rather than as a portrait of his mother, who at this time came over to be with her son, and she was in her 90s. Originally, she was supposed to stand for the picture, but, love her. It took quite a few sittings to put it together. But they objected to it being an arrangement because it was a different kind of perspective on what he was trying to achieve with paint. He was trying to understand how, by the manipulation of space and tone, we can affect and create a certain kind of atmospheric feeling. We'll be touching on a certain kind of movement that also appeared at the late 1900s, which influenced their choice of development of their emphasis on these tones. But you can see that fundamentally this is a grayscale painting with elements of certain muted, warm colours to draw attention to different aspects of it. It's quite sophisticated in terms of that we've got to balance everything with enough space in our picture. Often I emphasize create space, have space, so the viewer has an opportunity to rest in certain areas. But what the tonalists do is they simplify their subjects in terms of compositional shapes. Usually they have bigger areas, bolder areas, and that enables them then almost to treat those larger areas more clearly from a tonal aspect. So the tonalist painters often as well work towards their works where they stay within the middle range of tones. You'll see this a little bit later. But in this early one, you can see that Whistler has got a full range of tones, from the bright lights of the picture in the background to the darks of his mother's dress. The picture just flows beautifully in that circular motion, so that we don't never leave the subject, and then we're drawn to the light, of course, in the center. But in other aspects, it's quite abstract, isn't it? Because of the emphasis on the shape. Okay, so you can see how in this picture he's done a similar kind of thing. He's broken everything down to their shapes and their tonal relationships, but more so in this one, in the mid-range of the tones. The tonalists did like to make their tonal pictures with an emphasis on certain colours, blues particularly, browns, and moving towards the greys as well. Now, traditional painters, going back to the time of Titian, they usually started their picture as a tonal painting. they made a tonal underpainting, usually in burnt umber, on their canvas, lifting off the oil paint, maybe with a rag to reveal the lights. So they built up a three-dimensional, if you like, structural tonal picture, which they let dry, and then they started to put glazes of paint over the top of it. So this is a similar kind of way these tonalist painters are working. They're trying to balance and get harmony in their works. And we notice that with Whistler's pictures in his titles. He often uses titles which refer to musical themes, in this case, nocturnes. At that time, I just mentioned the Impressionist painters, but you also had the Impressionist composers. People like Debussy were making art, were making beautiful music that just kind of created wonderful atmospheric feelings within their pieces. They literally, the Impressionist composers used to refer to their pictures, their music in painterly terms. So there was a kind of crossover there. So harmony and tonal harmony were very important. When you reduce your dynamic range, that's a dynamic range in terms of light and shade, and you move into the mid tones. For example, we talk in terms of painting of high key and low key. High key would be the brightest kind of pictures, the lightest, and low key would be the darkest tones. The tonalist painters generally liked mid to dark tones, so mid to low key kind of paintings. They felt that this created a more of a special atmosphere, as you can see in these two as well. So the one on the left, it's called Nocturne in Black and Gold. That was taken from a visit he had in a local park where they had fireworks display going on. So that was his inspiration, but he's taken out all the bright colours and he's built up the picture around those beautiful grey colours. The grey colours which have got just a little bit of warmth in them to add that extra bit of interest. On the right hand side, it's done the same kind of thing. It's another night scene. Twilight. They like twilight and they like dawn in there as a theme for their work. And he's got this other feeling of another thing that they incorporate, soft edges. So midtones and soft edges, colors blue and brown. So these are some of the key characteristics of tonalism. Now, all painters to some degree, of course, will all have to be aware of tones. And the more aware you are of tonal balance, often, of course, the stronger your painting composition will be. Stronger your painting infrastructure will be. So it's good practice. Now, his work had a large influence on the other tonalist painters which were following him. And it developed a whole movement of tonalist painters. So when art history refers to tonalist painters, it usually refers to American painters, because it really took hold there, from the 1880s to the 1920s. They embraced it. We saw last week that there was also an Impressionist movement, but that was primarily rooted in the French art movement in Paris. But the tonalist painters as a kind of group took root in America, but having European influences, as you can see here. Now, George Inness, he worked in America and he stayed in America pretty much. And you can see he manages to create these beautiful atmospheric paintings by taking out saturated color and reducing the whole palette of his work into ranges of tones. Grey predominates, but blue-grey is right across that sky. The yellow ochre hints at the rainbow, and on the grass as well. But what George Inness does, he just, as well as having a lot of these soft effects, you can see in the sky there, he does have one foot in the French realist movement that kind of juxtaposes dark with light with certain areas with a higher contrast. So the sharp edge in some parts and the higher contrast are reduced in his pictures. So that just draws our eye to that particular area. So if you don't want the viewer to be drawn to a certain part of the picture, you put soft edges and you put tonal colors together, which are on the same range. So, for example, if you were thinking of tones in terms of 1 being bright and 5 being dark, if you put a 3 next to a 3 or a 4, then the viewer has interest, but it's suggested interest. It won't draw the viewer to that particular point in your picture. But then when you put 1 being brightest next to a 5, of course, they're going to be drawn to that. And if you make it sharp edged, they're drawn to it more. Okay, so you can balance between soft edges and closer tonal values and sharper edges and more divergent tonal values. So that will give your painting this extra dynamic. It enables you to create space, atmosphere, mood, and draw your viewer in and out to different parts of your painting. So you can see in this one, he's done away with those high dynamic ranges and stayed with closer tonal ranges. Now this creates this almost like overseeing misty effect, and we see this often. The whole thing looks misty with the soft edges, one tone bleeding into the other gently, and it creates a certain kind of what you could almost argue is a metaphysical atmosphere. It's not what the eye sees, and this was one of their preeminent philosophies. They wanted to try and get across in their landscape what you kind of feel, that fleeting feel that you get maybe when you look at a scene and the light takes on an almost supernatural, magical moment before it fleetingly moves on to another super wonderful moment or dynamic moment. But it was the essence of that they were trying to get. But they brought it into a kind of subdued, condensed manner. And you'll see that creates incredible beauty and a stillness in the work. But it has to be balanced. So it does take practice on when you're making a painting like this, practicing to get your values right. So, you know, if you go back to tone 1 to 5, what I said about bright and dark, you've got to practice getting, say, for example, tone 3 right for a green and tone 3 for a blue. So you've got the value, you've got the balance there. If it jumps too much up and down, then you lose the impact of this kind of painting. Now, there's ways to kind of shortcut that in painting, for example, by working on a coloured ground board. So, for example, if you made your whole picture on a brown colour board of, say, value 3, then you know when you put your other colours on, it's easy to see if that they're diverging from that value 3, whether they're going 2 to 1 or bright or somewhere in the other direction. So you can balance them out. And then when you put the soft ones next to each other, they balance seamlessly then. So that's the practice really. But you can see they create these wonderful, beautiful atmospheric effects here. Colors make a big difference in terms of the feeling of a piece. But ultimately, what he's done here is simplified the whole picture into what I described with Whistler in terms of mass shapes. So, of course, if our eye was seeing that, we'd be picking up all kinds of detail. You know, we'd have different variations in colors of grasses and flowers and light in different levels. So he's moved all that to represented by a overall tone. Okay, so we have, and he stayed within the mid ranges here. You know, there's not a lot of dynamic between very bright and very dark. So everything is round about tone 3 and 4. To give it subtlety, rather than just 1 to 5, you might do 1 to 9 or something like that. So he would stay in the range of 4, 5, and 6. So you can put different colors of those tonal ranges next to each other, and they will blend seamlessly and sit harmoniously. The thing, like we've said before, with painting is there's two ways to create light in a painting. One, of course, is add more white, and another is to think about what is around the color you're trying to lighten. So, for example, if you had a tone 2, a bright tone, and the colors around it were all tone 3, it wouldn't lighten it as much if the colors around it or the tones around it were tone 5 or 6, or that much darker. Okay, so everything relates to everything else. So you're balancing light against dark. In simple terms, it's a balance of light against dark, but it's tonal harmony. And when you do, you get these beautiful pieces that come out like this. There's a larger tonal range in this, but everything's pretty muted again, isn't it? Everything has got a kind of subdued, like as if the light has been taken out of the subject. In terms of the reason they were interested in dawn and sunset is because the light affects the objects in the landscape differently, of course. It is a softer light. It takes out the saturation. When it's midday, you see all very vibrant greens, for example, in that tree. Towards dusk or twilight, you don't, of course. So it's easier to see shapes. Now, a number of these painters did go out, paint outside, and you will see some of those later. They spent most of the time working outside. But George Inness was a bit more classical, and he was interested and inspired by the Barbizon school in France, which was, painting just outside Paris, but they painted plein air. They painted outside, which enabled them to really observe colours and subsequent tones. But their emphasis, of course, was on tonal values. This is another beautiful one, isn't it? You can see how the colour palette has completely changed, and with it, of course, the atmosphere. But look how everything's been broken down into simple shapes in the piece, just to put the composition together, with the odd few little details, but the emphasis is on those overall shapes, and then subtly building up those tonal relationships. Now, painting like this, you can almost see a brown underpainting, which was made first, and then let it dry. And as I said, in a traditional technique, they just put thin glazes of paint over the top to just draw out the relationships in the tone. But the artist has to have a kind of clear feeling and understanding about what emotion, if you like, they're trying to portray in the piece. Yeah. It is a kind of feeling of contemplation often with tonalist painters. They were interested in elements of those levels of subtlety. Okay. Now, we looked at this artist in Impressionist paint, in American Impressionists. So that's what I said about there being overlaps. But although there's Impressionism in terms of the kind of way some of the paint has been handled on here, these softer little effects, but it's very different to when you think of a Monet or a Renoir painting in terms of the representation of the landscape and the density and saturation of their color. But also motivation. The motivation of artists like this is more the Japanese print, that contemplative, reflective quality, that Zen quality, the Tao quality, whereby it's understated. So you withdraw a lot of the color, so you get another quality coming through. In Japanese and Chinese traditional painting, they just use sumi ink and silk. And sumi ink looks black fundamentally, but it contains a lot of other colours in it, which when it reacts with the silk, of course, those subtleties are slightly seen, they're hinted at. And it's this hinted at quality that these painters are aiming towards. They want us, the viewer, to kind of have the opportunity to slow down, decipher the white bridge in the centre there and its relationship with the tree and the flattening of the space, and reflect on the fact that everything is interconnected, everything is overlaying one aspect on top of another as time passes. It's those kinds of thought processes that the viewer gets an opportunity to explore with this kind of work. It's more of a contemplative aspect. And this one, where it's almost blue, white, and brown again, isn't it? These are the key colours for the tonalists. There's none of the blues and purples and things that you get in Impressionism. It's just taken to the fundamentals of giving the viewer the opportunity to interact with the piece in a more contemplative way. It's deceptively simple, A number of the American artists went over to France and, in this case, Germany, to interact with more traditional painters and realist painters to build their technique up. And as a result of that, you can see this is, of course, there's very few colours in it primarily, but they developed a level of using more texture in their work as well. Now, the texture was there for other reasons. We'll look at that. Maybe there's another one. Yeah, here you go. This is an example. This is Albert Ryder. Puts the texture in the picture for those other reasons which hint at transcendental, meditational relationships with the artwork. Put simply, we see a horse there eating, looking down on the ground. But because things have been built up with bold shapes and textures being built up and added, we start to, when we contemplate and look into the shadow areas with tonal relationships which are close, 3 to 4 or 4 to 6, things like that, they're close. Other forms start to emerge from the shadows. So if you look in this little space here, it's not that difficult to start reading into that. Maybe 2 eyes, nose and a mouth of a head and another head up here, maybe an animal down here. They kind of coax these things out of the shadows, out of the tones. Well, this was a kind of feeling or flavour, theosophy that was being shared and looked into. The spirit of an art piece, the spirit and the motivation that goes into creating a piece of artwork was also a consideration. And because of that, it just makes the picture alive in a different dimension. If this had been defined, sharply defined, of course, these things wouldn't be able to emerge. If this picture was brightly coloured, there'd be no space for these things to emerge as well. So it's just an emphasis from this group of painters. So if you like that aspect in your work, if you like an air of mystery, you can try out some of these techniques. You can try out building your canvas from mid-range tones. You can texture it in that way. You can try and just manipulate 1 or 2 colours of the same tonal range, in this case a brown and a green, close to each other, in bold shapes with soft edges, and that enables that aspect, the mysterious, to emerge from it. It's just another avenue to explore. As is it with this one, because he's reduced all the other dynamic colours and taken it just to these greens and these browns, he can almost indicate supernatural life forces in the trees and the spirit of the water and the landscape almost becoming alive. And then, he's taken traditional themes of nymphs and powerful riders and things like that, which is all about movement. But they're all treated in a similar kind of way. So the whole thing becomes a certain life force. And this is another lovely painter, Charles Warren Eaton. He loved to paint pine trees, so much so they used to call him the pine tree painter. Again, another emphasis on making his artwork in the evening, where the light is soft and subdued, but where atmosphere and mystery, of course, can take off. In the twilight shadows, all those shadow concepts that we just mentioned can really take flight, if you like, in your imagination in twilight. And I'm thinking of illustrators like Rackman and that, which took it on a little bit later as well, in a very different style, but same motivation. It's a lovely avenue to explore if that's part of your personality and that interest. And by not having to be so concerned about many colours, you can do it more easily. You might just want to experiment with the atmosphere that certain colours can create. You know, in our palette, we've got certain key colours, primary colours, cadmium red, cadmium yellow, cadmium blue. Most people go to that. But if you take one of those colours, say for example, your cadmium blue, and you subtly add white to it so that you can kind of change its tonal range, and then you can either add something like black to it to take it down tonally, you start to get more subtle colours. So it's an opportunity to explore these subtle dynamics, and then just enjoy the colours that you kind of find. It's easy sometimes to see all our beautiful colours in our palette as like sweets in a sweet shop. God, I really love that. I got to use that. But maybe in terms of tonalist pictures, you get an opportunity just to subtly modify them. So, for example, if you, again, we chose blue, but if you choose a red, there's two ways to lighten a red, say a cadmium red. You can use white, but then that might lead you towards pink. But you could also add just a tiny bit of yellow, because yellow in its hue is lighter than cadmium red. It will lighten that red, okay? And same with if you want to darken a color. If you had cobalt blue, which is a more mid-range tone, if you used, I don't know, phthalo blue, which is more lower key, that will darken it for you rather than using the black, you know, something like that. So there's just ways of just exploring the subtleties in how colors just transition. Yeah, we were talking about the brooding atmosphere of a painting being created by this artist that worked around New York. And we talked about the kind of textures that are in that and things that are kind of merging, all done with browns and greens and tiniest hint of blues, but with the subdued middle range of tones. So it's an archetypal toneless painting in that respect. This artist, again, their fascination with the midnight, with night effects, is being shown in this one. Taking out all those saturated colours adds that mysterious quality. When you paint night scenes, what you realise, because initially people think, oh, there can't be much light around, so I'll paint it really dark like the sky. But they're not that dark in the night. When you get a chance to have a look, you know, even when you're in a light-free zone, the sky has got these beautiful mid-tones in it, and but without the saturation. So, you know, it's subtle. It is subtle. This is, you know, another one which it looks like one of the first pictures that we looked at, taken everything by Whistler, his blue picture. It's taken everything down into a series of greys with a hint of greens in the mid zones again. But when you look at it subtly, you start to see figures emerging just below the wave. You see the direction of the waves crashing on the water, but in a kind of solid, still state. That's the reflective quality that you can we're referring to when we reflect on these pictures. They take you to a kind of another world, another dimension. It's strange. They do have an opportunity to open up that quality in the picture plane. And this is just an artist that was working with tonal range in a similar kind of ways that we've been talking to, but on a bigger scale. Frank Mathews trained as an architect, and he painted these large murals as well. And here you've got an image of St. Francis pointing the direction west towards what was San Francisco, that's where it took its name, of course, in a kind of iconic, kind of symbolic way, with all the different kind of characters included in that journey going west, whether from a Native American Indian in the background to Franciscan monks, etc., and liberties. But it's about the colours again, the tonal range, the emphasis on the blues, the browns, the yellows, the shapes of the colours, the flattening of those areas because of those more bold shapes. So it can work on this kind of scale. It doesn't have to be, the small intimate paintings, which a lot of them are. As long as subtly you experiment with how the colour of each and the tone of each colour reacts to its neighbour of similar values. This is a lovely one as well, isn't it? It would look very different if you took out that orange strip of the poppies down the bottom. There's a kind of clever interplay there with the blue of the sky and the orange of the poppies, which are complementary opposites, of course, but subtly subdued opposites. They got a higher white content in them to kind of tone them down, literally. And everything else is just a series of greys, and you can mix greys as well from using your complementary colours together. So the kind of whole thing just has a lovely spatial unity to it. The marks are very, almost kind of delicate as well, the way they're placed. You can see some of the brush marks at the top, and as they come down towards the centre, they get really kind of subtle. But they are a kind of contemplative way of putting that paint on. It's understated, isn't it, tonalism? I suppose that's another key element to it. It's not shouting at us. It's almost gently whispering, come and investigate, come and have a look, see how this makes you feel, explore this kind of feeling. Can you kind of relate to this? Does it kind of give you a more calming effect? Does it take you down, to slow you down, to be more introspect in how you reflect on these pictures? It's the absolute opposite, isn't it, of expressionism, particularly German expression or something like that, or Edvard Munch's Scream or whatever. Complete opposite to those extreme emotional explosions on the canvas. It's reflection, contemplation, subtle balance, as in this was a still life as well. The tones are just so close together, but in harmony, just subtle blues just running through there, blue greys with complementary oranges again, but very delicately done, taking a bright light to the center, but no real darks, no real black areas. The key tone is mid-tone blue-grey, and it doesn't move too far away from that. Certain colours to come towards us with the reds, certain ones to go away with the blues. And this is a pastel painting as well. So, it's all mediums you can try with this technique. I put this one in because it's almost barely there, is it? You can hardly see it, but it's painting mist. So all the saturation is taken out. It's just a beautifully subtle painting in that respect. And that's only achieved because the tonal relationships are so close together. The blues and the browns and the ochres, all close tone, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, all, that's 1 to 9, I was thinking there, in the centre. So they're all just next to each other. And you can get this kind of beautiful effect. In some respects, it's the only way you'll achieve something like fleeting effects like mist, and those foggy kind of paintings as well. You've got to bring all your tonal ranges close together. No matter what colours you use, you take out all that intensity, and then it'll offer this, like as if you're looking through clouds. And then the female artist, Elsie Whitaker, Martinez, she was a bit of a muse to a lot of the American painters. She lived till she was nearly 100, I think, if I remember rightly. But she engaged with the painting really well herself. As you can see, there's a real subtlety in her handling of the paint, particularly the light coming through the window there of these thin diaphanous nets. Just a hint of this bluey green just subtly coming through. She's taking on elements of Whistler's arrangements, this rectangle just behind to frame the head. But then the soft edges, and particularly as they go off into the shadows, merge. So then us as the viewer can get opportunity to explore and work out what those suggestions are happening in those spaces. Compositional shapes are not dissimilar to Whistler's mother painting there. Space, structure, design, all pulling together into a lovely contemplative painting again. And then the tonalist painters emerged in Australia as well, just a little bit later. There's a whole group of them. So I picked out Clarice Beckett, who in a lifetime was not really recognised. For a long time after she passed on, she was totally underrated. But now her work sells for massive amounts of money. She engaged with all the technicalities that we've been talking about tonight, and she honed it down to these very specific viewpoints where she just took out almost like a section of a scene, and distilled everything down to its essence. It's, as I said, not easy to achieve, to get those tonal balances as subtly blending and connected as she has. But when you do with these little snapshot areas, they kind of open up on contemplation of them. They're small and intimate, but when you reflect on them, they start to become big again for us, the viewer. And we also get a real sense of heat emerging from them. There's a dustiness, atmospheric dustiness and heat, I suppose, you get in Australia. There's the suggestion as well, again, by using those soft edges, which enable us to reflect. But there's tremendous editing going on in these pieces. She's just taken what is needed to just simple roof shapes with certain colours. This tree in the centre, it's just some marks, isn't it? It's like brown grey marks, but it's right. It's just right, and it's right because its tonal relationship with what everything else around it is right. It's deceptive, this kind of work. Here's two more by her. Wet Evening is a good example of how everything has been broken down to those simple shapes. So we're getting these key elements repeating itself. Tonal range is mid to dark in this case, but edited away so much information so that we can kind of fill in all the gaps. But they're abstract pieces as well. They're structurally well composed pieces. The direction of these trees frame this circular center, this center's sun. Its tone is just so subtle. It's not too bright, it's not too dark. It's just hanging there, like as if it's always been there. And this is about her motivation. She was a very sensitive painter, and that comes across in her paintings and the scale of them as well. She made a lot of paintings, and she painted outdoors a lot. But unfortunately, a lot of them got lost, and she didn't live very long, unfortunately. She died in her 40s, and she spent a lot of time looking after her parents. So her life wasn't particularly straightforward, but she had this sensitivity, this delicate sensitivity that enables poetry to come through in the work. Remember, a while ago we looked at what's her name, the Welsh painter Augustus John's Gwen John, and her work, particularly her later work, which became, when she entered and had connections with the nunnery, she took this subtle palette, and those enables poetry to shine out in a work. So if you're interested in exploring the poetic nature of painting in its more subtle sense, tonalism might be for you. So I thought I'll put a couple of images just to finish off so that we can see what we're doing in more simplistic terms. This is a monotone picture, just means using one color. You could use sepia, as in this. This is an oil painting, but it shows what is going on in terms of it's clear about what tone each part of the picture is, from the light to the mid to the dark. So it's a good place to start with tonal pictures. You can do a tonal version in the blues they like, the browns they like, the greys, and the picture might finish. You might get to the end and think, that's it. That's saying everything I need it to do. Or when you've done that, you could just add in one more color, maybe a blue, okay? And then you put the color tone that's for the blue, which is very similar to the brown, next to it, and that just adds that extra little bit of interest. But this will guide you in terms of finding the right tonal range of it. And this is just a simple little tonal chart to show that you can just experiment by starting off with a few colors, some of your favorite colors from your palette, and just working out a dark, a mid, and a light version for it. Okay, that'll give you the high key, the light, and the low key, the dark. When you add white to that or another color to it, it takes out some of its saturation, so that changes its hue. Okay, that makes the hue a little bit more soft, or a little bit more bright, or a little bit more dark, should we say. But you can experiment with this on all your colors, light, mid, dark, and then you can try and make a picture with the mid tone of three or four of your favorite colors and see what happens. Just experiment with that. Try that. It can be extremely beautiful. It can be the color relationships when they're similar, but different color, but similar tone, can create amazing harmonies. So just try it. There we go. And then I just sort of finished with a more contemporary painter, American artist Hilary Scott. It's a beautiful scene, isn't it? It's uplifting, but it's soft, it's delicate. It's using all the characteristics that we've discussed tonight, with shape and emphasis on the shape and the stillness, emphasis on the horizontal, emphasis on the mid-range tones, and setting the mood or the atmosphere, in this case with the similar tones of that blue and that pink and crimson colour there. And it creates a lovely harmonious effect.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification.